Welcome to the How of Business with your host, Henry Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to this episode of the How of Business. This is Henry Lopez. My guest today is Kevin Maney. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Henry. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're going to chat today about and explore the topic of Kevin's latest book, which is about how business owners can escape what often is for us, Kevin. We're going to explore this crowded, price-driven competition by hopefully redefining the space that we're in. And so that's what we're going to explore. You can find all of the resources, everything we talk about, links that we share today, including information about my one-on-one and group coaching programs at thehowofbusiness.com. I also invite you to consider joining the How of Business community on Patreon and subscribe wherever you might be listening to this episode so you don't miss any new episodes. Let me tell you a little bit more about Kevin Maney, and then we'll get into the conversation. Kevin Maney is a best-selling author, a long-time business journalist, and the co-founding partner of the firm Category Design Advisors. And Category Design Advisors, they help leadership teams define, name, and lead new market categories rather than simply compete with existing ones. He co-authored the very popular book, Play Bigger, and that book is what brought the whole category design concept and approach into the mainstream. And his writings have appeared in major outlets like Newsweek, Fortune, The Atlantic, Wired, USA Today. And then today we're going to focus specifically, as I said, on his latest book, the title, which is The Category Creation Formula, a practical guide to discovering, designing, and winning new market categories. So with all that, Kevin lives in New York City. Kevin Maney, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good, great introduction. Appreciate it.
No problem. I appreciate you being here today. So I thought we would start with just defining what are we talking about when we say category creation and the category creation formula. Let's start there. What are we talking about here?
So market categories, a category is something like, generic, like microwave oven or a smartphone. Those are categories of product. And it turns out that whether we're talking about, on the global scale or whether we're talking about, in your small town, the businesses that really stand out and change the way we do things and that we remember, we admire, generally tend to be businesses that bring us a category that didn't exist before. Something that needed to exist but didn't exist. You can go to an Uber with ride hailing, and how that before that we just had taxis, and then we have this whole new way of doing
we
things.
had a category there, but they disrupted that category, so that's part of this as well, right? That's
we honestly, Andrew, we try to stay away from the word disrupt because actually it created something new, right?
You look at it as it created something new because to your point, you live in Manhattan, taxis still exist.
They're still there
in conjunction with now this new rideshare service.
Yeah. And certainly sometimes new categories take apart old ones or make them change. Forever that's happened, right? Television was a new category that made radio into, something different than what radio is before that. It's, this has happened over and over in history.
Of course.
And, and what we came to realize when we first started this journey down the whole category design path was that in most market categories, and again, whether we're talking on a big scale or a small scale, whoever is the leader of that category tends to get all the attention, get most of the economics, get most of the market share. And, there's a number two or a number three, but it's that one that really kind of controls and makes the most of that category. So that what we're saying is like, okay, if you're running a business, why wouldn't you do everything you can to be that one? And so we spent years reverse engineering how companies that did that and put together some playbooks for how anybody can kind of think through in that way.
How do we apply this though then, Kevin, to the reality, at least in my experience, that there are only so many new categories to invent. So we end up, especially for small business owners, going into crowded spaces and trying to stand out there, right? So I get this, but what I struggle with is how do I apply this? And of course, this happens a lot when we're talking about, like, say, a Silicon Valley startup where we're inventing a whole new software, a whole new solution. But if I'm going into the home services business, for example, that's already crowded, can I apply some of this same approach and the formula in that space or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called The Category Creation Formula. Let me tell you what that is.
What is the formula? Yeah.
What is the formula? Because it's actually We realized this after 10 years of working with companies, and it really becomes a very helpful thinking tool for anyone in any kind of market, right? So the formula is very simple. Let me explain the pieces. It's context plus missing plus innovation is what gives you a new category, a new market category. So let me explain this, and especially with emphasis on if you're a small business in a particular city or town. So context means what is changing around your target audience, and that can be like how technology is changing. It can be how the economy is changing, how the population around you is changing. I mean, there's so many things, and the more that things change, the more that it creates either new problems that didn't exist before,
right,
or new and different ways to solve a problem that's been around forever.
All right, let me interject there if I could. So in context, for example, it could be that solutions that were available to a certain demographic, that demographic now has aged or is aging. Now they have different needs for a particular problem that they have, right?
That could be it. It could also be that, I know this veers into technology, but still even technology applies to even a small business, right?
Yeah.
You're in a town and you realize that there's this new thing called artificial intelligence that maybe could be applied to something just very in your very small niche that could actually make a big difference in how something works. What we encourage business owners to do is to start actually in a place that most of them don't start, which is have a deep conversation with your team about the context. What's going on with the audience we're trying to address? How are things changing? What's new about possible solutions to old problems? What's a new problem? Really try to dig into that conversation. Because if you really can understand and put some words around the context, then what you start to see is the next piece, which is the missing. What's missing in this new context? What's the new problem that now exists, or the old problem that can be solved in a new way that your audience in this new context would be so happy to have solved? And if you can see that missing, it becomes pretty easy to see what the innovation you need to create to solve for that missing in this new context. And if you see all of that, you're probably creating something new and different that didn't exist before. And what you want is people to say, the ultimate is people to say like, oh my God, why didn't this? I'm so glad this now exists. Why didn't somebody think of that before? I mean, that's like the ultimate win, right?
And that can happen even in an otherwise crowded segment or industry or market, right? Because now I'm carving out a niche within it where I can be unique. Am I following correctly?
You are. So let me give you an example of somebody who sought us out, even though he's not in, a technology space or a big business space, right? So there's this fellow here in New York. I'm in New York and he's in Brooklyn, named Waleed Cope. And Waleed had been in the laundry business for a generation. And what he saw when he started to think about changes and population and everything was that there are lots of laundromats and wash and fold kinds of things that are very impersonal. They're low cost. They're not very nice usually, right? And then, or there's some high-end concierge, laundry service. But what he saw was that there was a missing in between, which is a very personalized, friendly, sort of a little bit higher end than kind of a laundry.
Something that was
service.
Clean and I actually want to sit down and read a book while my laundry's being done. So that kind of an environment, yeah.
Some mix between a cafe and a laundry, and a laundry service. So he started this company called the Soapbox, has done phenomenally well, just in Brooklyn, right? And but the thing is that by doing this, he stands out as something different. He's not competing on price. He's not competing on number of locations. He's competing on being something different from everybody else in that business. And that's what we're really about.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example because having visited the city often, there's a laundromat on every corner. There's a wash and fold place on every other corner. There's a dry cleaner there's hundreds of these types of providing the basic service of cleaning or helping or allowing me to wash my clothes. He created a new category within a crowded market. Is that fair?
Yes. Okay. And within a geography too, because,
yes.
He's, as far as I know, he wasn't doing this with the ambition of, I'm going to franchise these across the world or something. It was, my audience in Brooklyn has changed. It's gotten wealthier. It's gotten younger, and they're looking for a different kind of service than exists right now.
This is Henry Lopez with a brief break from this episode to tell you about our sponsor, Intuit QuickBooks Payroll. Running a small business is already a full-time job. Managing payroll and HR shouldn't feel like a second one. That's why so many businesses trust Intuit QuickBooks Payroll, the #1 payroll software for small businesses, to run payroll with confidence and keep everything connected to their books. As a small business owner, I use QuickBooks in my own business, and I see every day how much easier it makes managing our finances. And now QuickBooks Payroll is evolving. Starting this summer, it's expanding beyond pay runs to support how you hire, onboard, manage, and retain your team, all in one connected system. We're talking about bringing HR, time, benefits, and workforce data together, fully integrated with QuickBooks Accounting, so you can operate with more clarity and confidence. Soon, with QuickBooks Payroll, businesses will be able to hire and onboard employees directly inside QuickBooks, manage HR documents with e-signatures and organized storage, automate multi-step HR workflows, and track time off, performance, and benefits alongside payroll. No duplicate data entry, no syncing between vendors, no learning an entirely new platform. Just one place to confidently manage your team and your business, where you're already running your finances. See what a difference QuickBooks Payroll can make for your business today and get ready for what's coming next. Learn more at quickbooks.com/workforce. That's quickbooks.com/workforce. Yeah, the other thing I've observed in that segment, just because I've researched this, I'm interested in that segment, is it used to be the thought was, laundromats are in poor neighborhoods. Not there's anything wrong with that. In poor neighborhoods where they don't have washers and dryers. But that has changed. People now see it as more convenient to go where there are, let's say, high capacity washers, and I get all my wash done in 2 loads, right? So there's different reasons now why people go to a laundromat, not just because they may or may not have a washer or dryer at home.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But to that end, then that demographic expects a different experience that they weren't getting.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Right.
Okay.
I grew up with a lesson in this that my very first job. So I grew up in Binghamton, New York, and I grew up playing hockey, and there was no skate shop in the city that had like knowledgeable people and and good service. There was a big sporting goods store where you might find some skates, whatever. So this guy named Harold Beam, who had been an Olympic speed skater when he was young, opened this tiny little skate shop, but it was very hands-on. It was, he obviously knew everything about skates. I was probably 15 and I went to work for him. I learned to sharpen skates and things like that.
Wow. But
he established something that just was missing in the town. And so he became known, and everybody for 50 miles around would come to this guy. And that's what we're talking about. And then he has the other thing that happens when you do something like that is because we work with all these cognitive biases in our brains. And when somebody establishes something like that, it really establishes in people's minds that is the leader and that's the one to go to, even when others come in to the market.
That's that first mover advantage. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's a little more than, because there's a lot of first movers who don't manage to got it.
You have to get to that certain level of reputation and scale to establish that leadership role. Okay.
Yeah. We see this all the time. And again, to move towards the big, broad technology things, it's like Google managed to stick in our heads as the place to go for search, and we all do that. They have like 90% market share of search, even though there are other search engines that probably deliver better results. But it doesn't. We don't care because that bias is stuck in our head.
Yeah, it's just like with the beta versus the VHS and which one won there. So I get that. Going back to also then the context, I think if I'm following that part of it, that first step, it really speaks to whether I'm planning to start a business or I have an existing business, making sure you spend the time listening to the consumer, the buyer, and really understanding what it is that they need, right? So, which really is business 101, but I think sometimes we tend to skip that because, I have a passion for food, so I'm going to open a restaurant. But this formula really requires that we carefully listen either to our existing customer or to our prospective customers. Am I getting that part of it?
You are right, but with a twist.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a twist. There's an apocryphal quote, right, from Henry Ford that if I listened to my customers, they would say they wanted a faster horse. Existing customers don't tend to know what they don't yet know, right? They will say, you're a restaurant, for instance, that I'd love a restaurant that, has cheaper prices or something like that, right? So yes, it does involve paying close attention to what your customers are saying, what's going on around them, and understanding that. But it also, you have to apply a layer of imagination on top of that as somebody who really knows a sector and a business and a town or whatever it is that you really know, and be able to imagine something that your audience really can't yet imagine,
Right.
and then tell them about it and bring them to that.
Yeah, that's a brilliant qualifier because, if we go back to Henry Ford, he thought a black was the only color people would want, right? And that was one of the ways that Chevy came in and said, no, we were going to offer all these colors. And so he got stuck there, right? Because he just assumed. Or similar to when before the iPhone, you would have asked, I remember asking my wife, because there was somebody in our family had gotten one of the first iPhones, and I remember her saying, I can't imagine what I would use that for, right?
Right.
And now we can't imagine living without it. But that's the point you're making, that we have to then connect the dots of, we need to look into the future and say, but if they had this, and that's what makes it hard, right? If they had this, would they use it? And other things where I think that comes to mind here is, and COVID helped in a lot of this. But I think 5 years ago, if you would have said the way you make a reservation at a restaurant is you do it online, people would have said, no, I don't trust that. I want to call and make a reservation. Now, nobody wants to call, right? I want to do it on my phone, right? But that's to your point, that part of what we have to do as entrepreneurs is envision what somebody might respond to. Is that what you're saying in part?
Yes, absolutely. Which, by the way, again, going back to the sort of simple formula, that discussion can help you see what that is. But then there's what we do with that. So if we have a client and we take them through that process, that thinking, and there's a lot of other, discussion and thinking tools, but an important thing to come out with is what we end up calling a POV, point of view, right? It's a point of view on the new category. But here's what's important about it that, again, most businesses and business leaders don't do. Most businesses want to start out by telling you, here's what we do, or here's the product, and here's what it looks like, right? That's the beginning.
Here are the features. Yeah.
Right. Which makes us as individuals have to think like, well, okay, how do I use that? Or what's it good for?
You're asking me to connect the dots.
You're asking me to connect the dots. So the way that we construct, and it's really helpful to have a narrative story that is not necessarily the story you're going to like spew every time you talk to anybody else, but the world is held together by stories, right? I mean, the Bible or the Declaration of Independence, I mean, the words and stories hold the world together. And so having a narrative story that is about why your business exists and why this new category should exist and why you're the one to bring it to the world gives everybody on your staff, everybody that you're marketing to, something that a common language, a common way to talk about this.
Yeah.
And the story should begin with the problem, not begin with your product or your service or whatever. So if the story begins with, let me tell you, I understand this problem you have. And let me explain it to you so that you explain it back to you so that you sit there basically nodding your head and going, yeah, well, that's right.
That's me. I mean, that's right. I have that problem. Yeah.
If you start with that, then the audience you're addressing their reaction is going to be to pull them in, right? Okay, you understand my problem. Like, now tell me how to solve it. So if the POV begins with like really doing a deep dive about like really describing that problem and then turning the corner and saying, okay, here's a solution that should exist in the world. This is not, stay away from that at that point from marketing yourself, but actually explain this should exist in the world to solve your problem. Whether we do it or not, somebody's got to do this, right? If that's the feeling you can engender in people, like, okay, I understand your problem. And yes, you know what? You just described something. God, I really want that to exist. And then at the end of that comes the part where you say, and look, we're doing this. Here's why we're qualified to do this. We've had 25 years of experience in this business, and we know our whatever. And if you do it in that way, you've got a story to tell that's going to pull people in, rather than a marketing pitch or a sales pitch that makes people kind of go, whoa, all right, you're trying to sell me something. I don't understand why I need this.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let me see if I can apply it to an example to see if I'm really getting it. If I think of, for example, me as a consumer of home services. Let's take a plumber. Actually, we had our dishwasher go out recently, and so we had to get it serviced. One of the biggest things that I still frustrated with is they'll give you that window. We'll be there between 9 and noon, right? Hopefully. And the reality is that that day we'll find out when they really show up. So let's say if I started a dishwasher repair service, of which there are a million of them, but what the story I'm going to tell is the problem you have is setting aside time. You got to take time off from work or whatever the case is. The story is that I'm going to help you with that problem. You have this problem of scheduling someone to come service your dishwasher. I'm acknowledging that pain that you have. Now, the broken dishwasher is obvious, but the challenge is that time that you have to allocate to wait for somebody to show up.
Yeah.
If I highlight and speak to that, that's the story I tell. And then I say, what we have is an approach that allows me to come in within a 1 hour window. I'm not saying it. I'm just making that up.
Yeah.
That part of what you're talking about there, is that an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what's then becomes interesting about that is that the price becomes less important.
That's right. Because now I'm not attracting the person who is looking for the cheapest price. I'm attracting the person who is looking for the convenience and the benefit of having somebody come in when they say they're going to come in and fix my problem.
Yep. And you know what? Yeah, and I love this example because it's actually redefining the problem, right? Because most people think my problem is that I've got a broken dishwasher.
Exactly.
But if you redefine it and say your problem is time. You're busy. You can't take the time to do this, and redefine it that way, it becomes a whole new category in people's minds, like, right?
Yeah.
It's a really great example, Henry. Okay,
I get it. I understand. That's fantastic. This also speaks to, as I was kind of trying to summarize the concept here, the changing, this is the words that I kind of use to summarize, changing how the customer thinks about the problem and then becoming the obvious solution. So that's the example that we're giving here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's where the story part of it comes in. And what you're saying, of course, is that in my marketing, I lead with that, not we fix dishwashers and we have the best parts, or we use, the best technology, or we have the highest trained technicians. Everybody has that too, that we're changing the narrative or the story to this ideal problem. And what's missing was somebody that guarantees a 1 hour window.
Right. Yep. That's great. That works well.
Okay. All right. Great.
We take one step back too and apply this to one other thought here, is that a market category or a category of business or service or product or whatever, it really is, all it is a space in people's heads, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people, and one of my colleagues likes to say that, that most business owners think of the market like it's the weather, like it just exists, you can't change it.
Right.
But that's not true, because the market exists in our heads. And if it exists in our heads, it can be, influenced and it can open up new spaces. And so that's what you're trying to do here. You're trying to create a new space in people's minds that didn't exist before. An easy example of that is if you think about it, I'm sure, Henry, of like, you and your family were going to have 15 years ago a discussion about buying a car. There was no conversation about, are we going to buy an electric car? Are we going to buy a gas powered car? Right. And because that space in people's minds just wasn't there. And all these years later, thanks to Tesla opening it up, mm-hmm. and then actually importantly, Tesla paving the way for others, GM and Ford and Volkswagen and BMW or whatever, to make electric cars. We now have a vibrant space in our minds that says an electric car is an option. It was created out of thin air because you can do this and you can do this on a small scale or a big scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great metaphor, Kevin. I've often heard it by other marketing experts talk about a parking space and thinking of it that way, right? That there's this space in our mind that we hold for these different categories. Here, what we're doing, of course, is helping people create a new space. I hadn't thought about solving that problem that way. But we do that by first triggering or getting somebody to connect. Yes, I have that problem. Okay, here's how we do it differently. Yeah, how's that we solve that problem? As you work with clients, small and large, what are some of the other common mistakes that they make that you see related to this topic of differentiating themselves?
Yeah, I'll tell you about another thinking tool that can be pretty helpful. And well, this seems like it mostly applies to technology, which it certainly does in a big way. I think it also can have an influence in many different kinds of businesses. So there's a concept that we actually, there's this great book came out more than a decade ago probably, but it's got by an author named Stephen Johnson. The book was basically a study of innovations throughout history and why they caught on at the particular time they caught on. Where good ideas come from is the name of the book.
That's the name of the book?
Yeah. And so one of the hinges in the book is this concept that he calls the adjacent possible, which actually he stole from biology and we stole from him and modified it a bit too. If you think about, there's two factors that go into when something catches on or why it works. So one is what the technology is capable of doing. So in tech circles, it's certainly what the technology or computers or software or whatever. But it could be can an electric car work and run far enough, or can you use AI to schedule people so well that dishwasher repair person would show up exactly on time? That's right. So that's one factor. And the other factor,
does the technology work, or does the product or service or solution work?
Right. And something crazy like quantum computing is like outside of the realm of what works right now, but it will someday. It's it's a lab experiment. The other factor is us humans, like what we can get our arms around and decide to adopt. If you kind of graph those two things together, the space constantly moves because technology keeps getting better and we keep bringing things into our lives. So if you think about that and think about the business that you're in, if you're landing in the space that we would call the possible, right? Technology exists, it works, everybody knows what that is and adopts it and brings it into their life. If your business is in that space, your categories that already exist, and there's probably a leader who already has that winning thing. So your goal in that space is to try to maybe compete on price or a couple features, and you're going to get some 7% market share or something.
Right.
By the way, nothing wrong with that. There are thousands and thousands of businesses that are exactly that, right? Nothing wrong with that at all. On the other end of that spectrum, if you go out into the space of call it the not yet possible, right? Technology is still iffy, not really totally working, or the product or whatever. And we don't quite understand how to use it in our lives yet. If you're out there somewhere and you start a business, you say, this is what we're doing. You might get some early adopters kicking the tires, but most people are going to say, like, I don't get that. It doesn't quite work yet. I'm not ready for that. If you're waiting for like everybody to catch up to that, you might run out of time and money before it ever happens.
Exactly. I'm counting on those early adopters to buy it, and that's usually not enough, right?
Right. So
it's certainly not enough for small business owners with limited resources. I can't get there fast enough. You can't get to scale fast enough.
So what Johnson came to realize, over the centuries, right, is that when something really catches on and works, is when it lands in the spot that's this thin band between those two spaces, right? It pushes the concept of what the product can do just a little bit beyond like what has existed before. So it seems like cool and new and interesting, and it pushes us a little bit to feel like we're getting something that's new and different. It's not the same old thing. It's not like too hard to understand. And when you can land in that space, that's when you really make people feel like, oh, this is really cool and new, and I understand it, and I want that right now, right? So you're not having to, and again, like the on-time dishwasher repairman thing is a great example of this, right? If you could nail that, and people say, like, I understand why I need that, understand that works, technology works, I get it. It's better than what's already in that possible area. It's not too weird that I can't understand how it's going to work. You're not going to send a robot to fix my dishwasher.
Right, exactly. Right? Because, I get, I can wrap my arms around it. I understand how that works. Now, it could be that as the provider, I'm using technology to facilitate that, but that's not the point. The point is that the consumer understands how that would work.
Yes, right. And also believes that it's something new and interesting, right? If you can land in that space, the other important thing is to understand that space constantly moves forward, progresses. If you're really smart about it, then you tell the story of what you can do now, landing in that adjacent possible, but also have a hint of, I know where this is going. I'm going to be able to take you on a journey as this capability, this product, the service gets, better. Maybe, and again, I'm sorry to keep going back to this metaphor you set up, but, in the dishwasher repair thing, if today I could say, we use AI so we can schedule a repairman who's going to be there within a 1 hour window. But you know what? This is going to get so good that within the next 2 years, we're going to be able to tell you an exact time, and he's always going to be at that exact time. And we can envision a day 5 years out when we're going to send a robot to fix your,
Yeah, or the dishwasher is going to self-diagnose and send us ahead of time what's broken, so we
or
have the
that. Yeah,
parts.
right,
Yeah,
right, exactly. So
because
there's,
I mean that happened with the dishwasher. Continuing with that story, he came. Oh, this pump is broken. We got to order the part. Okay.
perfect
Oh, that
example.
would have saved me time, money. Again, now I have to schedule a second visit for him to come out because he had to get the part.
Yep, that's great. Yep, and so being able to make people feel like you're going to take them on a journey as things change and get better. That's a powerful place to be.
That also, I guess, Kevin, creates I don't know, in my words, some stickiness. This is still my provider with this because look at how they continue to innovate to help me
Yeah.
make my life easier. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
All right. And that's what they expect. I guess that's one of the reasons, for example, that people stay loyal to Apple because they are excited and waiting for the next upgrade or the next feature. And they're excited. It's going to be even better. Wait till the next version of it comes out. And I'm going to line up for it because I want the next technology boost. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah. And there's a sense of that Apple, and Apple's a great example of that because there's a sense that Apple is going to help me move to the future.
That's right.
I'm
I
not
see
going to
what
be
you're
left
saying.
behind if I'm staying
Exactly.
with
If
it.
I stick with them, they're going to help me get there and leverage that technology. I get it. So the opposite of that, then back to the question about where you see people making a mistake is not taking that approach. It's not helping people with knowing you're going to take them on this journey. What is the common mistake that you're seeing related to this?
Two mistakes. So one is that we're going to land in the already possible,
I got it. That's where we went off on talking about
right?
Stephen Johnson's book. Yeah.
And we're going to end up, saying that we're 10% cheaper and always, be fighting that battle. That's one mistake. The other mistake is to be too far out, right? So that people don't believe this thing is going to work or don't understand how it's going to work. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
And even if you do the great job of landing in that adjacent possible space, overlooking having that story to tell that says, we know how we're stick with us. We're going to take you on a journey as technology changes or as things change.
Love it.
Or as
Love it.
or as the town changes or whatever the changes are about. But and again, that all circles back to, if you're a business owner, the most important thing you can constantly keep your finger on is that context, is making sure you understand how things are changing so that you can constantly be on top of the right problem.
And I have found in my years in business ownership, Kevin, that one of the ways to do that well is to be as close to the customer or the client as possible and listen to and observe and watch and study how they're using, if you have a current solution, how they're using it. I've always found that to be critical. What can happen to us as business owners is we can, as we grow, start to separate ourselves from talking to the customer. Does that make sense? That's
Yeah.
partly where I continue to be in that context?
Yeah. No, it is. But it's more than just talking to the customer, right? Because you want to understand like everything that's going on around the customer.
Around them, yeah.
So again, going back to the example,
because again, the customer is not going to necessarily tell me, oh, but if you did this, I really would love that. They don't know that. I need to put that together based on their lives and the context around them that's evolving.
Yeah, and your customer is not necessarily going to, be the one that walks in and says, but my the neighborhood's changing. It's people are getting older or whatever is happening, and
they don't see the macro necessarily, and that's my job.
You need to do that. You need to do that.
Fair, great stuff. All right, so the book again that we've been referring to that Kevin Maney has just published is The Category Creation Formula: A Practical Guide to Discovering, Designing, and Writing New Market Categories. And then thanks for the other book recommendation by Stephen Johnson, Where Good Ideas Come From. I'll have links to Kevin's book as well as that book on the show notes page to this episode at thehowofbusiness.com. Let me step back, Kevin. Why did you write this book?
Good question. So 10 years ago, 2016, and again, you started off by telling everybody, I mean, I've been a journalist writing about the tech industry and an author of many books over the years. And that was my career. And 10 years ago, I was a co-author of a book called Play Bigger that caught on, right? It sold super well. And Play Bigger was the book that introduced this concept of category design. And I wrote it with these other Silicon Valley guys and turned into something that, once the book was out, that like CEOs and investors and whatever were calling us and say, please help us do what you wrote about in the book. So I started a consulting business to actually like do these category design projects with companies. By doing that for 10 years, I and my business partner developed new concepts and new ways of thinking. The category formula we talked about, the adjacent possible. These were all things that didn't exist in the Play Bigger universe back then. We didn't know about them. I've also been, we've worked with like 50 companies over the years, spoken to hundreds more, and through all of that, learned a lot about like what works better, what doesn't work from the previous book. New ways of doing things. So all of that, we decided like we've learned so much in 10 years. We captured all of that in this new book. And we framed it as essentially like, we're just going to give away what we do and how we do it. So it literally is a step-by-step.
Yeah, this is more of a how-to book than Play Bigger was. You know?
Yeah, it's just, you could run this playbook and you read it, understand exactly what this is all about, and you could run the play that we do with large clients.
Excellent. Excellent. I think one of the key takeaways here on this topic, the book and our conversation is, this is the big challenge for us as small business owners is for all kinds of different reasons, we end up in saturated markets trying to differentiate ourselves. At the end of the day, we end up then competing on price, and that's a downward spiral. So this is a great way to, even within those saturated segments, identify where we can create a whole new category as we have defined here today.
Yep. I'll tell you another story because you're asking about mistakes, right? And so there's one other interesting mistake, and I can tell you a story that goes along with it that is completely outside the realm of technology or usual business here. And that mistake is actually creating a category that doesn't matter or that nobody wants, because that's also possible, right? You could go through this whole exercise and create something that seems brilliant, and one of the stories we tell in the book is about the knuckleball in baseball. And because empirically, I ran the numbers, and of all the knuckleball pitchers that have ever pitched in Major League Baseball, 12% of them are in the Hall of Fame. Of all the players that ever played in baseball, 2% are in the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
So you could derive from that the idea that, the knuckleball is actually a very effective pitch. And in fact, there's a lot of advantages to it because pitchers can pitch more often. That doesn't tire their arm out. Knuckleball pitchers tend to pitch until their 40s because they don't get burned out. There's all these advantages. And yet, baseball has decided that the only pitchers that it really wants are ones that can throw 95 miles an hour.
Interesting.
And so there's this whole spiral effect that because that's what Major League Baseball wants. I mean, nobody teaches a kid how to throw a knuckleball, so no more knuckleball pitchers don't come up. There's only one knuckleball pitcher in the Major League right now, by the way.
And does the MLB not want that because there's less home runs, less hits? Is that why, or why do they not want that?
It's the industry, the sector, whatever, has made a collective decision that the pitchers at once are hard throwing pitchers. That the knuckleball is too weird and unpredictable, and we don't know how to coach it. And and even though you could potentially prove that the knuckleball would actually, a knuckleball pitcher would actually,
especially in this era of analytics, you would think the numbers point that way. But anyway,
so essentially, the knuckleball is a category of product that the audience doesn't want.
Interesting. That's a good example. Yeah.
And so that's not a place you want to be. And by the way, you hear it seems like a cliche that, somebody else's, some competitors came into my category. And so that helps validate the category. You think that's like writing it off, but it's actually important, because if you see others saying we're doing this too, it means that you've created something that should really exist and that people are going to want. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen, you probably should take that signal as like, well, maybe this isn't this category to be in.
Right. And it goes back to the point of being that pioneer. Well, pioneers get arrows sometimes, right? So and they end up dead before they can get to maturity. Another wonderful analogy there. I get what you're talking about there. All right, let's wrap it up, Kevin. Let's recap here. What's one thing that if I'm listening as a small business owner, or I'm looking to start my first small business, what's one key takeaway from this conversation?
I think there's a very simple one, which is it's better to be different than to try to be better. And different is what sticks in people's minds and wins you loyal customers and separates you from having to be competing on price or features. And, this methodology that we have is one way to try to figure out how to be different.
Love that. The challenge is, though, I think, though, is it's harder to be different than to be better. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Especially when my better is, oh, we're just going to deliver better customer service, or I'm going to have a cheaper price.
And it's easier to think about better too, because it's like, okay, I know that this thing exists and how it works, so I can go into that. I know there's an audience for that.
So I'm going to deliver the same mousetrap, but mine's going to be a nickel cheaper, or I'm going to bundle it, whatever that might be.
Yeah. And again, going back to, there are a zillion businesses that are like that, and many people make a great living doing that. But if you want to be more ambitious, if you want to be somebody who really stands out, then making that leap to different is the way to go.
Love it. Where do you want us to go to find out more about you? And also, I mean, the book is available anywhere you might buy a book. It's available on Amazon. But where do you want us to go online to learn more about you?
Well, there's a site for the book itself.
Okay, great.
The book
Let's
is called
do that.
The Category Creation Formula.com. You can go there. And of course, I'm Kevin Maney. I have my own website that has all the different books and writings, and I'm a musician and composer, and I have that stuff up there too.
Wow.
So it's
Renaissance man. You've done it all. The categorycreation.com. Is that what you said the website was?
The category creation formula.com.
Formula.com. I thought I was missing something there. And I'll have that link on the show notes page for this episode as well, in case you're listening somewhere where you can't write it down. Just go to the howofbusiness.com, search for Kevin or the category creation. It'll come up and I'll have a link to that page. This is a great book. Thank you so much for this conversation. Very enlightening, very valuable, and actionable, which is also what I always love. Thanks for being with me today, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, Henry. This was fun.
Excellent. This is Henry Lopez. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again, Kevin Maney. I release new episodes every Monday morning. You can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including the How of Business YouTube channel and at my website, thehowofbusiness.com. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.